It's been a few weeks now since Carlos Alcaraz and Juan Carlos Ferrero officially ended their professional relationship.
I don't know, it's very tough to say all these things in words.
It would be wonderful. That's the man who built Carlos Alcaraz, talking about coaching the one player on earth trying to tear him down. Read that line again. Juan Carlos Ferrero, the coach who took a 15-year-old kid and forged him into a 6-time Grand Slam champion. The man Alcaraz calls a second father. The man who, just 7 months ago, walked away in the most painful split modern tennis has seen and admitted on the record, "I gave everything. I'm hurt." Now that same man is publicly saying he'd love to coach Jannik Sinner, Carlos's arch-rival, the one guy standing between Alcaraz and total control of this sport, the enemy. Consider how insane that is. A father figure, 7 months after the breakup, openly warming to the idea of sharpening the sword aimed at his own son. In almost any other sport, this is the ultimate betrayal. The mentor drifting toward the rival's corner, and the tennis world exploded. Fans called it disloyal, vengeful, a knife in Carlos's back before the wound had even closed. But this is what makes it the most fascinating story in tennis right now. Because moments later, in the interviews where he warmed to Sinner, Ferrero said something that should rattle Jannik far more than it should ever wound Carlos. Asked point blank to compare them, the one man alive who has studied both games from the inside, didn't dodge, didn't diplomatically split it down the middle, he picked Carlos, flat out. And he laid out, in almost surgical detail, the exact reason Jannik Sinner still can't shake him. So what is Ferrero really doing here? Is he betraying the kid he raised? Or is this the most devastating backhanded compliment in the sport? A coach dangling himself in front of the rival while calmly informing the entire planet that his old pupil is still the better man? Because you cannot have it both ways. Unless, that's exactly the point. The answer reveals more about Carlos, about Jannik, and about the wounded genius caught between them than any headline has bothered to explain. Let's start with the bombshell. Rewind to a few weeks ago. Ferrero sits down for an interview and the question lands, would you ever coach Jannik Sinner? For months he'd swatted it away. Too soon, too raw. Not the time, but this time, something had shifted. A few months ago, he says, I would have said no. The breakup with Carlos was too recent and I wasn't ready. Then the pivot. But now that I feel stronger, why not? And then the line that lit the fuse. He likes Sinner's attitude, he says. Sinner works hard, he's willing to do anything to stay number one. It would be wonderful to coach him. Wonderful. That's the word he reached for, about the one man Carlos Alcaraz has spent his whole career trying to beat. For a coach who preached total loyalty and total dedication for 7 years, a man who once confiscated phones and set curfews to keep his players locked in, it's a staggering thing to say out loud. Loyalty was the whole religion, and it did not land softly. Spanish media called it a bombshell. Fans who'd spent years watching Ferrero wrap Carlos in a hug after title suddenly saw those images in a colder light. Because you have to understand exactly who these two men are to each other before you understand why one word, wonderful, hit like a slap across the face. Ferrero isn't Carlos's ex-coach the way most players have an ex-coach. He's the man who took a scrawny 15-year-old out of a small town in Murcia and, over 7 years, built a 6-time major champion from the ground up. He turned down other stars to bet everything on Alcaraz. He was there for the first title, the first number one, the Wimbledon Nights, the Roland Garros Wars. Carlos called him a second father. Ferrero called Carlos his fourth child. That's not a business arrangement, that's family. And when it ended, back in December, it ended ugly. A contract dispute, a 48-hour ultimatum, a split that blindsided the entire sport just weeks before the Australian Open. Ferrero didn't hide the wound. I gave everything, he told Marca. I poured my soul into this project. I'm hurt. He admitted he still thinks about Carlos every single day. The two barely speak now. A text when Carlos won in Australia, a message when he got injured, and that's about it. For a bond that intimate to shrink to a handful of texts a year, that's its own quiet kind of grief. So do the emotional math. 7 months after getting his heart broken by the boy he built, the grieving father figure turns around and says he'd relish coaching that boy's single greatest enemy. If you felt a flicker of betrayal reading that, you're not wrong to. On its face, it's brutal. If you want the part of this story that completely reframes it, and it does, subscribe now, because the twist is where this gets good. Because this is what almost every furious headline left out. In those interviews, sometimes in his very next answer, Ferrero was asked to compare his old pupil to Sinner. His old pupil against Sinner, the rivalry that will define the next 10 years of tennis. And the man who arguably understands both games better than any human alive delivered a verdict that should make Sinner deeply uncomfortable. He didn't hedge, he didn't diplomatically play nice. He said Carlos is ahead, flat out. In his exact words, "For me, Carlos is 100% ahead, like 55-45. He put an actual number on it, the kind of number only a coach who has charted every point would dare say out loud. And then he broke down why, with the cold precision of a man who spent 7 years studying nothing but how to win. Carlos, he said, is more dynamic. More shots, more variety, more ways to hurt you. And critically, Carlos can strip away Sinner's rhythm because Jannik, for all his genius, loves to play one way above all others. Fast, flat, hitting at the same height, again and again. Disrupt that rhythm, and Sinner is beatable." Then Ferrero dropped the detail that reframes the whole thing. The improvements he made to Carlos's game over those 7 years were specifically tailored to beat Jannik Sinner. The blueprint to beat the world number 1 isn't theoretical. Ferrero already built it into Carlos brick by brick, and their record backs him up. Alcaraz leads their rivalry 10 wins to 7, even if Sinner's clawed back the last couple of meetings. In the biggest moment of all, the 2025 Roland Garros final, it was Carlos who saved championship points and won. Ferrero isn't guessing, he's remembering. That's the difference between a hot take and a scouting report. One is noise, the other is a map drawn from the inside. But before anyone crowns Ferrero a traitor or a mastermind, the deflating truth is this: the whole thing is, for now, hypothetical. Sinner never asked. Ferrero was crystal clear on that point. Nobody from Jannik's team has contacted him about anything. Sinner has worked with Darren Cahill and Simone Vagnazzi since 2022. He's built a deep, trusting bond with both, and there is zero indication he wants to change a single thing. Why on earth would he? He's the #1 player in the world. So Ferrero's open door isn't a plan, it's a door left open. A coach simply saying he wouldn't slam it shut if the phone ever rang. And he's turning down work as it is. By his own account, 4 different top 20 players have come calling, and he's said no to everyone because he's still not ready. And the part that really guts the betrayal narrative? Ferrero left another door open too. The same one. Asked whether he'd reunite with Carlos, he didn't laugh it off. He said it out loud. Alcaraz and Ferrero, Part 2. Who knows? He even revealed he was the one who encouraged Samuel Lopez to stay on as Carlos's new coach. This is not a man plotting revenge. This is a man who refuses to burn a single bridge. Not with Sinner, not with Carlos, not with anyone. And the biggest hole in the entire Carlos is doomed without Ferrero story? Carlos already answered it himself. Weeks after the split with Lopez in his corner, he won the Australian Open and completed the career Grand Slam, the youngest man in history to do it. The doomsday version of this story collapsed before it even started. The kid was lifting a trophy while the internet mourned him. He didn't need rescuing. He was more than fine. So strip away the outrage, and what's actually left is far more interesting than a betrayal. Juan Carlos Ferrero isn't choosing Sinner over Alcaraz. He's doing what a wounded, brilliant coach does once the dust settles, keeping every option alive and telling the truth exactly as he sees it. And that truth, from the one man on earth most qualified to judge it, is this: Carlos Alcaraz is still, by a razor's edge, the best on the planet. Consider how strange and how powerful that is. The person with more reason than anyone to feel bitter about Carlos, the guy who got his heart broken and might one day coach the enemy, sized up the two titans of this sport, and still, without a flicker of hesitation, put his old kid on top. That's not the sound of a man moving on from Alcaraz. That's the sound of a man who can't quite let go. and who, even now, believes in Carlos more than almost anyone alive. You don't build a kid for 7 years and then stop rating him the second the paperwork ends. It's the most human thing there is. You can be hurt by someone and still believe they're the best in the world. Just handed the world the most revealing read on this rivalry anyone will ever get. Let's bring it all home. The headline screamed betrayal. The truth turned out to be something far more human. Juan Carlos Ferrero didn't stab Carlos Alcaraz in the back. He left a door cracked open, just as he left one cracked for a reunion with Carlos himself, the same way any smart coach keeps his options alive. Sinner never called. Nothing is happening. And in the middle of all that supposed disloyalty, Ferrero did the one thing a traitor never does. He looked at the two best players on earth and told the entire world his old kid is still the better one. 55-45. Carlos ahead. You don't hand your rival that kind of ammunition if you're secretly trying to sink your old pupil. That's not a man who fell out of love with Alcaraz. That's a man who built him, lost him, and still can't stop believing in him. Wound and all. But this is where you come in. Because Ferrero just did something rare. He handed us the most authoritative scouting report on the biggest rivalry in tennis, from the one person who's coached inside this rivalry. He gave you his verdict. Now I want yours. Carlos versus Jannik. The flair and the fire against the machine and the metronome. The man who leads the head-to-head 10-7, against the man who's won the last two, sitting at number 1 while Carlos claws his way back from injury. Ferrero says Carlos by a hair. But he also says it'll always be razor close. And the last two meetings both went Sinner's way. So the door is genuinely open for the debate and maybe one day for the coach. Tell me in the comments who you got. Do you trust the coach who literally built one of them? Or has Sinner already flipped the script for good? Carlos or Jannik? Drop your pick, drop your reason, and let's settle it down there. Loudest, most convincing take wins. One thing's certain though, this rivalry is the story of the next decade, and the man who helped write its first chapter just told you how he thinks it ends.